This is a moment I've dreamed about all of my life, and I'm not unique in that respect. Virtually everyone who's dreamed about racing once in their life has probably dreamed about racing at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. But there aren't many folks out there who can claim their first race was at Indy. We arrived in Indy the day before qualifying to set up shop and prepare our karts for the long weekend ahead. Instrumental in helping this program come together was the Cuthbertson racing team. Amy, Derek, and my teammate Kyle, who was racing in the Honda 125 shifter category, were very open and generous with their time and effort, which was essential for someone as new to the sport of karting as I am. Even with my limited knowledge, I pitched in to help prepare the karts. But the nerves were already beginning to build. I knew that with my lack of experience, this was going to be an uphill struggle. It was a bright and early wake-up call the next morning, as there was still some prep work to be done on the kart before I went out for my first practice session. All of my racing gear was borrowed from the team, including this replica Red Bull F1 uniform that was 2 sizes too big for my body. And finally, for the first time in person, I heard my kart fire up. Unfortunately, all of this took a little too much time, and I missed my first practice session. So, after a little bit of liquid courage, I was ready to make my debut in practice 2.
So, David, you're about to go up for your first practice session. What's your feelings right now?
Nervous.
Don't look behind you. That's etiquette.
Oh, we'll be all right.
Okay, so what's your expectations?
I know, they said that.
There you go.
They said that in the driver's meeting. I was going to film, but I wanted to actually listen.
What's your expectations?
Keep it on the black stuff for now. My nerves were justified. I had not even so much as sat in this kart before, much less driven it. Meaning this practice session was going to double as a seat fit and a test drive. An intimidating task.
He's literally got 88. It's Dale.
He lives!
No turning back now, no second thoughts. I had gotten my opportunity, and I was about to drive at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway.
It was okay. Obviously, coming to grips with it, kind of understanding what the brakes do, is a big key because the brakes are not nearly as good as they are in like indoor karting or something. I haven't gotten the hairpin right. I feel like I've got some pace, especially when I get behind other people. We just gotta, I wish we would have had that morning session to do that, but
I feel like we're good on gear though, and I see you come by the straights. You're looking pretty
it's fast.
good.
Got some more track time. We're literally about to qualify right now, 20 minutes until we go out there. And we'll see how it goes. We seem to be about mid-pack, but we're overweight. So considering that we're, overweight a little bit, we'll be all right, I think. Just get it in the show right now, and we'll see how it goes from there, I guess.
It did not go well. In the rush to get the kart to the pits for qualifying, I forgot my tech sheet. The tech sheet was essential to getting on the track for qualifying. Without it, the officials would not let me go out. So as Kyle rushed back to the camp to get the tech sheet, I pleaded with the officials to let me out, which they eventually did, but I lost 2 qualifying laps that I otherwise could have used to find speed. In doing so, I set the 44th fastest time. However, things went from bad to worse when I realized I had bump drafted during qualifying, which is a big no-no, and the officials took away my fastest lap. This relegated me to 48th position out of 57 karts on the starting grid. Needless to say, I was pissed and in a deep hole heading into the heat race the next day. Thankfully, the struggle of the first day ended on a positive note, as all of the competitors of the battle at the Brickyard were allowed to take a ceremonial lap around the 2.5-mile oval. This was an incredibly surreal and unique experience. It's kind of funny that when you're driving on the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, you don't really realize it. You don't realize you're crossing the bricks. You don't realize you're in turn 1. You don't even really feel the banking. It's just a very interesting experience. The track looks so different as well when you're driving on it versus when you are spectating or watching on TV or even driving it in a video game. It's so different, but what a cool experience this was. The pomp and circumstance of the night before was all but forgotten. This was a serious day. This was the day I'd see my first green flag. And to cover the action better, I went to Walmart the night before and picked up a GoPro camera to mount on my side pod. Prior to the morning warm-up, we made a setup change to the kart to try to get a little bit more speed out of the slow sections of the course where I felt I was losing the most of my time. But as I rolled out, the cool conditions coupled with the setup change made the kart very unbalanced compared to the way it had been the day before. To make matters worse, I didn't tighten down the GoPro, so the footage was pretty much crap. Secretly, I began to fear that nothing was going to go right for me this weekend. This was it, my first heat with 47 karts ahead of me. I fully expected it to be wild. I didn't quite expect this. I'm still not entirely sure how I made it through the big one. I think it's partially down to my inexperience not getting a very good start on the green flag. Couple that with the fact that I was already expecting a pretty big accident at turn 1 that I would have to thread my way through. And I guess you could sprinkle a little bit of racing luck in there as well. Unfortunately, the rest of the race consisted of me getting passed, mostly out of the hairpin corner, by the faster guys and gals who were caught up in the opening lap schmozzle. I figured it was mostly down to my driving, the inexperience again. But I did observe that it seemed like all of the karts around me were accelerating much faster out of the hairpin and thus getting a faster run down the back straightaway. Check out this as an example. A huge pack of karts formed in front of me and I caught them up in the higher speed sections of the course. I hitched right onto the back of this pack coming out of the hairpin and you'd expect that I'd be able to keep up in the draft with them. But no, they accelerate away from me. Very curious. Even more curious was my pace in the high-speed sections of the course. Watch the gap to the kart ahead close as I go through this left-right chicane. Unfortunately, I was bitten by a rookie mistake. By driving too fast into the corner before the hairpin and going off the road, costing myself 3 positions, and thus 3 positions further back I would start in the pre-final. Mercifully, I survived the carnage of the heat race, and not only did I see my first green flag, I also saw my first checkered flag. Somewhat of a consolation prize. Kyle and Derek believed the acceleration problems were down to being geared too high. But when Derek took the kart apart to change the gears, he discovered something much more serious. A faulty clutch that had been completely stripped out, that apparently I had been running with all weekend long. This mechanical issue explained away most of my acceleration problems, so that meant, for the pre-final, I had no excuses. It was time to race. Due to a wave off of the initial start, the back of the field was very antsy, and I got checked up, losing a ton of positions when the green flag flew, which I then tried to make up going into the hairpin. Bad idea, more ground lost. But I used my superior pace in the high-speed corners to make up ground, coming up behind a huge pack of karts and getting an opportunity to utilize one of the most important techniques a kart racer can use at an event like this, the bump draft. My friend Steve, an experienced kart racer and one of the front runners in this very race, told me that a driver can make up nearly 2 seconds a lap by using the bump draft correctly. What Steve didn't tell me was that even at these relatively low speeds, aerodynamic push is still very much a thing, and following behind another kart closely in a high-speed corner is very difficult to do. Though I can't blame this particular mistake on aerodynamics, rather just following a guy into a corner and also following him off the track. Then, finally, things started to click. Using my favorite corner, the left-right chicane, I made what I considered to be my first true competitive pass of the weekend. Feeling confident, I quickly closed the gap to the kart ahead of me, using all the road to my advantage. But then, another lesson. A yellow flag was displayed in the hairpin. And seeing another waved yellow flag displayed on the corner exiting the hairpin, I hesitated for the briefest moment, not wanting to be the guy in his first race that plowed into an accident scene or hit a marshal. But in reality, I probably shouldn't have checked up, because the guy behind me certainly didn't. That did it. I was faster than both of these guys. I had to pass him. So, since 85 kindly placed himself in front of me, I used him as a bump drafting partner, pushing him alongside and past number 13. But before I made the pass myself, something in my brain told me not to. Maybe it was the way 13 was driving, it just didn't sit well with me. But discretion became the better part of valor. I knew I had the pace over both 85 and 13, and I let him in line for now. The guy behind me must have also felt that way about my pace, because as I snuck underneath 13 out of my favorite sets of corners, I got an absolutely almighty bump draft, which pushed me past 13. And as the starter flashed 2 laps to go, the bump draft carried me past number 85, a double overtake. How damn cool is that? I was now the leader of my group. All I had to do was hang on for 2 more laps. But then, something happened behind me that nearly ended my race. As it turns out, my suspicions about number 13 were correct. He tried the old 2-for-1 deal at Kmart into the right-hander before the hairpin, and nearly collected me as he spun. It was my second lucky escape of the weekend. On to the final lap now. I caught and passed number 14T going into the right-hander where 13 had crashed the lap before. But then I was caught and passed going into the hairpin. Up a position, down a position. But I once again saw the checkered flag. And this time, I was pretty pleased with my performance. Unlike the heat, I had raced, not just ridden around. The team was pretty pleased too.
Dude, I'm so freaking proud of you. Way to hold your ground there.
Personally, I felt my pre-final was just an alright race, and there was much more to be found on the table, and hopefully it would be found on race day. We were up bright and early again for the final morning warm-up of the weekend. This time, I insisted on pushing as far to the front of the queue as possible, as I would be running in traffic in the race, and I wanted to run in heavy traffic during the morning warm-up. Despite the kart feeling much better than it had in the previous warm-up session, I still managed to get caught out by cold tires, adding to the old racing adage that nothing good ever happens in morning warm-up. There wasn't much time between the morning warm-up and my race to do much of anything, so we fueled the kart, and I thanked a few of the special people who helped make this dream possible.
Here we are, race morning at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, about to kick off for my first official race ever. A few people I'd like to thank before we get going here. All the people on the side pod who helped sponsor this through Indiegogo, particularly Umer Ahmad, Alan Smith, and Victor Kook. You guys are friggin' awesome, and could not have made this program happen without you. So thank you so much, and I hope we can do you proud.
It was crazy how many friends, family, and fans I'd never even met in my life came out to watch me race. It was really humbling, and at the same time, it made these nervous moments before the opening ceremonies even more nervous.
From the fields I used to roam, when I dream about the moonlight on the Wabash, then I long for my Indiana home.
Thank you everybody for being here this weekend, and last year, let's keep this a tradition that continues to go. And now for those most famous words, drivers, start your engines.
I'm glad they gave us a full pace lap to calm down a little bit. If the emotion and passion was even half of that in the rest of the karts that there was in mine, when I was sitting on the grid at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway during Back Home Again in Indiana, I can assure you that the first corner of that race would have been the biggest crash karting has ever seen. But after a little bit of pre-race camaraderie with the drivers around me, it was game time, and I was determined to have my best start of the weekend. But as we came down for the start, I didn't stay hooked to the kart ahead of me, something essential for a good start. I botched it again. I felt a huge space between me and the 5 kart ahead of me. But as we moved through turn 1 and I began to pick up some serious speed, a hole opened up and I jammed it up the inside 3 wide. The problem with making a move like that, however, is that I was now 3 wide on the outside for the F1 horseshoe. There wasn't an awful lot of rubber out there and the kart was none too pleased. I lost a few of the positions I had gained in turn 1 just by slipping and sliding on the outside. It was then essential for me to fall into line as we approached the right-hander leading up to the hairpin, as I knew the hairpin was going to be so very essential on this opening lap. Losing momentum into and out of the hairpin was not an option, so I shoved the 21 kart all the way through the hairpin, which in retrospect may have been an absolutely enormous mistake, as my kart suddenly bogged down as I came out of the hairpin. I knew I was a sitting duck. 1 kart, then 2 karts streamed by me on the back straightaway, which would lead to the moment that would unfortunately determine my race. To this day, I still struggle with what I could have done differently on this opening lap to avoid this accident. Maybe I should have run the guy over. Maybe I should have sent it up the inside and hoped that he saw me when I was on the inside of him heading into one of the tightest corners on the racetrack. Regardless, the end result is still the same. I chose to touch the brakes at the exact wrong part on the track, where the transition between the access roads and the racetrack occurs. That bump upset the rear of my kart and sent me for a spin, where I was collected by another kart and several more piled in. Despite my spin and subsequent contact, my kart was virtually undamaged and I was able to continue in the race. The same could not be said for some of the drivers in the lead pack at the end of lap 1. Things can always be worse in racing. The rest of my race was fairly uneventful as I didn't have anyone to draft or race with. I was focused mostly on lap time, and because of that, I made up most of the 20-something odd second gap that I had lost in my spin to the back of the field, and actually on the last lap started catching some of the back markers. I actually ended up turning my fastest lap of the weekend on the last lap of the race, which we will view in its entirety right now. So that was that. Race over. And it seemed so short. I felt like I could do another 100 laps if I needed to. And it seemed like just a moment later we were loading up the trailer and leaving. I will race again. And I will race here again. The lessons I learned, and some of them very difficult, will be great moving forward. I'll leave you with this, a credit roll of just a few of the people who helped make this possible and one of the best experiences of my life.